Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Merle Massie. I'm the coordinator for the Undergraduate Research Initiative here at the University of Saskatchewan, and I'll be actually giving the presentation today, so I won't be passing it over to a guest. Today, I'll be talking about the 3-minute pitch for a general audience. Now, I've written it as if you're talking to a general audience, because even though some of you might be preparing to present at a symposium, at an academic symposium, but even in that particular situation, you can't always assume that everyone who walks up to you already has a really, really good background in whatever it is that you've been researching. You're the expert, they may not be. And so the assumption is that you need to be able to write your pitch for a general audience. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And so with that, I'm going to start my presentation. And of course, we do a land acknowledgement here in Western Canada at the University of Saskatchewan. As a settler Canadian of Scottish, Irish, Norwegian, Swedish, and Ukrainian tradition, I am filled with gratitude to live within Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. I give respect to the First Nations and Métis of this place, and I continually value our interconnectedness through Wekutuwin. I too love this land of vast skies and tall trees, Saskatoons and blueberries, and the swift and slow waters of the Saskatchewan River. If you get a chance to do your own personal land acknowledgement through the Guanama Center at the University of Saskatchewan, I recommend it. So what we're going to be talking about today is the 3-minute pitch. And like I said, I want you to think through how to do that sort of 3-minute talk to distill your research down into a quick 3-minute talk for public presentations of your research. And these are the 3 things to remember. The first is that your first audience that you really want to serve is a non-specialist audience. They're probably highly intelligent, highly trained, but they might be someone like me, whose PhD is in history and maybe you're in microbiology. And so, or you might be in microbiology, but maybe your listener is over in veterinary medicine, or maybe your listener is in engineering. So they might be a specialist in their own area, but they might not be a specialist in your area. So today we're going to think through how to serve that non-specialist audience. The second thing we're going to talk about today is storytelling and salesmanship and conversation, because really, if you're at a symposium and you're giving that 3-minute pitch or 3-minute overview of your research, this is really about storytelling and salesmanship. You want the audience to come with you on the journey. You also, if you're standing in front of a poster and you've got a real live person standing in front of you, you also want to be able to initiate a conversation. So those are the things we're going to be talking about today. And the third is actually practicing. So those of you who might be here because you're part of the in-person symposium on August 25th at the University of Saskatchewan, but this is a recommendation for anyone. If you know that you are going to be at a symposium or a convention of any kind or poster session, and you know that you're going to be talking to people, I highly recommend that you actually write out what you think you want to say and practice, practice, practice. So we're going to talk about those 3 things today. So first of all, this is about you being a tour guide, a cheerleader, and a storyteller. What energy you bring to your story, to your research story, is what will sell your research to the audience standing in front of you. So think of yourself as the cheerleader for your research. And yeah, it does sound a little bit over the top. Maybe you're like me and it really takes a lot of energy to be extroverted. Maybe you're more of an introvert. You can still be quiet, but you still need to be excited and a cheerleader and a storyteller about what you've done. So these are 3 things about the best stories, because if you're presenting at a symposium and there's a wall of posters and there's 4 walls of posters and people are trying to go up and down, you know that you only have a certain very small window to get their attention. And then there's their attention, what you think you've got them, and then there's how much you can actually get inside their head. So making your story memorable, understandable, and repeatable are the 3 biggest goals that I want you to think about today. If you take nothing else away from today's presentation, those are your 3 goals. You want people to remember your work. Oh, there was this student who had a great presentation about bees. I totally got it. She talked about how we want to use bees to do some other kinds of science and research. And I really think that we should support that lab. And so you'll notice that they've turned around, they've taken your work and they're telling it to someone else. So it's memorable, they understood it, and they're repeating it to someone else. Those are your goals. That's what you want, is when people leave the symposium, that your poster is one of the ones that stands out and that they can remember. So serving that non-specialized listener. So this is a picture of me in 2012 at a group of graduate students up at Emma Lake. I'm a historian. Most of the people in that audience were all scientists, and they were training to be scientists, masters of sustainable environmental management, most part, some of them were PhDs, and it was an international audience. And we were talking about historical work in the area where I grew up. And so it was my job to not only explain to them why history is important from an ecological perspective and how you can layer that in over time, but to really explain the particular space that we were standing in, which was a very old homestead, to people from an international audience. So that was my challenge. So they're very, very technical people, but they weren't necessarily specialized in Saskatchewan history. And it was my job to take them along for the ride. So you need to be able to explain your work to a non-specialist audience. And sometimes I'll use the word general audience as well, because a general audience, you have to assume, has a pretty good background in education. You just want to talk to people. Maybe it's your grandma who might have been a retired teacher. She's got excellent education, reads all the time, does puzzles, very smart. She may not have a background in what you're doing, but all you need to do is to give her enough to bring her along for the ride. The easier that you feel that you are a master of your subject matter, the better that you understand what it is that you want to say, the easier it will be for you to explain it to someone else. So if you're still kind of stuck and you're not exactly sure you understood what you did, maybe take a little bit of extra time to really understand what it was that your research was all about and what you actually found. Really understand it yourself before you even attempt to explain it to someone else. The better that you have mastery over and I don't mean the technical details, you'll have those, but sometimes it's actually harder to think about those large scale umbrella things. Why are we doing this research? What's going on here? What's the end goal? So the mastery of your subject matter, once you have that, then you can add in some storytelling devices. Maybe you'll tell a story, maybe you'll use an analogy. We'll break a few of these ideas down. So you add a few storytelling devices, but here's the important one. You take out the unnecessary details. This is something that happens with my husband sometimes. He's a scientist. He loves to grow things, and he's an expert in growing things. He's growing an orchard at our farm. And people ask him, so what are you growing in your orchard? They're looking for, well, we're, that high level. We've got plums and apples and haskaps and so on and so forth. But he will sometimes drop into the technical details. Well, we have 4 different kinds of plums and we do this for these reasons. And it gets really, really down in the weeds and very technical, when really the audience is just like, oh, wow, you're growing plums. Isn't that cool? I didn't know we could grow plums in Western Canada. And so figuring out what the unnecessary details are, what happens is that if you give that broad scale story and your audience would like more details, they'll ask you for them. That's the key. So don't give them details, keep them very high level. Unless they ask for more, then you go a little deeper. And if they ask for more, you can go a little deeper again. But start at the top. Don't jump all the way to the nitty-gritty. That is how you serve your audience, because that general, intelligent audience doesn't need to go right down into the weeds. They want that general overview, and it's your job to draw them in. So how do we do that? This is sort of the biggest question. So this is a picture from the USSU symposium this past spring. So always think about your research, not so much from what you want to tell them, but what does your audience most want or most need to know? So I break this down into why, how, and why, and we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail in a couple of slides. But if you start with the why, then tell them how, and then go why, and I'll break that down a little bit better. Why, how, why. If that becomes your mantra, that's going to help you get through that 3-minute presentation. And the reason why we say 3 minutes is that that's about even 2 to 3 minutes, that's about the extent that you can ask a person to politely stand in front of your poster and have you tell them about it. You don't have 8 to 10 minutes. You're monopolizing their time. They've got other posters to get to. They want to get through as many as they can. You want to be respectful of their time and energy. That's why you keep it to that 2 to 3 minutes. They're interested in, why did you look into this? So why are you doing this research? Why is your research lab, your research program, why were you interested in this particular story or this particular project? And then how did you do it? How did you look into it? And what exactly did you do? That's when you can get into a little bit of the technical details. So I was looking at this particular part of this larger project, and this is what I looked at. And then you tell them and what you found. And then you end off with why again. Why does it matter? This is really cool what we found, even though it's small and technical, because it's going to shift directions for the larger research lab or whatever it is that you found. And so you tell them why you looked into that overarching, how you did it, and then why does it matter? This is something that we, as university people, academics in general, sometimes get wrong, because we're so often marked on how smart we sound, in terms of our exams, or in terms of, maybe we're being asked to give a presentation, and we really worry about how smart we sound and how well we do it. But really, if you flip that, it's actually the audience that's the most important. How much your audience understands and whether they respond to you and walk with you and go along for the ride, that's what you're aiming for. So if you can kind of shift that and recognize that, yes, you're the one telling the story, but of the two people standing there in that dynamic, it's your listener who's the most important person. So again, that's starting and ending with why. Why were you interested in this? So talk about that large scale overview. We're looking at whether or not bees can be used as a proxy for humans to study particular things. Or maybe you're looking at fruit flies and how they react to particular drugs. Or maybe you're looking at zebrafish and how they react, because they are a proxy for humans, and it might get us further along in studying something like Parkinson's or cancer. So why were you interested in this? What did you do? What did you find? What happened? And the third, of course, is, why does it matter? Why does it matter within the context of your research project or the larger research group that you're involved in, or even as far out as the discipline? And why does it matter? So those, if you start and end with why in your 3 minutes, that actually gives you a structure that gives you an arc throughout everything that you do. The second thing is really about storytelling. Now, I don't know if you guys know this, but I actually am an author. And so my background is in storytelling. My background is in why we tell stories the way we do and what we can do to shift a particular story. Because if you tell a story in a particular way, it actually changes how your audience responds to it. Something like in modern Canadian events, for example, if there's a pipeline going through a First Nations reserve, if you choose to tell the story as land defenders, you're telling your audience a particular thing. If you choose to tell the story and the words that you'd use are government rights or ownership rights or property rights, or that we need the oil, it's we have an oil obstruction and we need to get our oil to market. If you're telling it from that particular way, you are signaling to your audience a particular way that you view the story. It might be the exact same facts, but how you tell that story does matter. And the second part of that is about connecting with your audience. In terms of being in the same room and actually having that conversation, looking them in the eye, sharing that connection is part of what's automatically going to be happening, but there are things that you can do to really bring them in. One of those ways is actually to open with a hook. So this is a classic journalism or a storytelling device. So if you read a story in a magazine or in a newspaper, generally they open with a hook. Sometimes you're looking to spark curiosity. You'll say, what happens when, a particular thing? Or have you ever wondered about how marijuana affects, humans, now that, marijuana is more readily available, it's on every corner store, it seems like. So our research group is looking into how we can use marijuana. And so we're looking at rats, whatever it is. So you can spark their curiosity. You can tell them a story clip. Sometimes you can say, okay, so this is something that happened when we were in the lab, and tell them a bit of a story, or you can tell them a story maybe about how you got interested. That actually works quite well. Let's say that your grandmother had cancer and you became a particular kind of very rare form of cancer and you became really interested in doing research on cancer. You can always start with that story clip, a personal story, and showcase how you yourself got interested in this particular research. That automatically creates a connection with your audience. Another way, especially if you have really highly technical things, is an analogy or a metaphor. So if you can come up with some kind of an analogy that explains what you're doing in a simplified way, that's still accurate, but just, maybe just uses a different kind of storytelling, that actually it eases the barrier for your audience. It's like, oh, I understand. So whatever it is that you're researching, maybe you can tell them an analogy or a metaphor around this is a bit like when everyone sits down at a picnic table and you put the food in the middle and everyone has plates, and whether or not you dole out the food or whether everyone gets to serve themselves, and maybe that suits your particular research example. Maybe it won't, but that's just an analogy. So sometimes you can use an analogy or a metaphor to really break down those barriers between you and your audience. You can also make a statement. Lots of people will do a fact or a statistic or an opinion or just an open declaration. And that will stop people short. And it's like, really? You think that? It's like, yeah, I believe that because this is what my research had to say about it. You can say that, 46% of Canada's farmland is in Saskatchewan. It's like, what? Like almost half of Canada's farmland is in Saskatchewan. Yes, that's why the farm lobby in Saskatchewan is so large. And then maybe you're making a comment about agriculture. Some of your research is about agriculture, and then that's why it matters. So you can start with a statement, and that's another way to open with a hook. So these are just a few examples. There are others. The one I don't want you to start with is a dictionary definition. Please don't use that one. That's very trite and overused. But start with a hook and find a way to break down those barriers between you and your audience. The two components, and there's two sections to this slide, is the first is that it is your job to make it as easy for the listener as you can. So you need to get to the point. If it's something, again, I just mentioned, if it's complex stories and analogies can be really helpful. Sometimes you do need to give a little bit of context and background, but this is where you need to be careful. We as researchers will sometimes dive straight down into the weeds and get far too technical for the audience, and we've lost them. You take a look at them, their eyes are glazed over, you know that you've lost them, and they're just being polite. And they're just like got that glazed head nod going on. Sometimes context and background is necessary, but dole it out. It's like mustard. Too much and you've ruined the sandwich. So be very, very cautious with how much context and background you give. There are some good communication keys. And these are sort of all over the map in terms of what I find is the most important to the least important. And some of these are more technical and some of these are just more your own personality. But being honest and confident is really, really important. So you're not standing up there to tell them a lie. So being honest really means that you have the ability to say, yeah, we actually screwed up in our research and look at what we found. It was such an accidental thing. Or you can say, yeah, we thought that we were going to find something really neat. In the end, we didn't find anything. That's still a research finding and it's completely valid, and it's just as valid as finding something new and interesting. Sometimes you find nothing, but that's important too. So being honest is important. Being confident as you can be. It's not easy for those of us who are shy, for those of us who really have to work on being able to speak to the public. But the more you know your stuff, that will raise your confidence. Another thing to think about, especially actually both online and in person, and this is something that I talk about when I talk about how to make a research poster. The very last bit of that session that I did on how to make a research poster is actually about doing physical things to bring your energy and tone up, like things like doing the Wonder Woman stretch before you, and to stand on your hips. Just go to the bathroom, put your hands on your hips, put your shoulders back, put your chest out. What it does is that it fills your body with energy, it fills your body with oxygen, and it actually lowers your tone and gives you a much better volume. So if you go and do that for a couple of minutes before you walk into the symposium, you're going to have a different level of body confidence, which actually does matter both online and in person. So even when someone is presenting online, I do recommend that they do that they do some voice activation work. The other three things that are on this list, and again, like I said, they're sort of all over the map, is to use familiar words. So very, very simple words. And I've got another slide in a second that reminds us that the simplest words are usually the best because they're familiar. They're familiar for your entire audience, even if English is not their first language. At an academic conference, if you're asked to present in English, probably only about a third to a half of your audience has English as a first language. It might not be your first language. And so bringing your confidence, your energy, and your tone up will help you to overcome some of those things. And using the simplest words will make sure that everyone can understand you the first time you say something. Being short and to the point. When I say 2 to 3 minutes, I really, really mean that. You only have their attention for a very, very short amount of time, and everyone else deserves their attention as well, so you don't want to monopolize in an in-person poster session. And the last is an active voice. So whatever you write, to make sure that you say, I saw this, I did that. You want first person and active voice to really showcase you as being the researcher who did the work. You know, rather than saying, well, the research group did this, that's third person. You may or may not have been involved in that, but anything that you want to tell your audience about, you want to tell them about the things that you did. And that's what they're interested in learning about. So when we talk about plain language, and this is especially important if you actually are presenting to a truly general audience. I took a group of students down to the legislature in May for Future Now, and they were all talking to MLAs, most of whom did not have any kind of technical or scientific or theoretical background. And so we really had to work with the students to make sure that they removed all the jargon from their work. Acronyms, this is something that we have at university all the time. My favorite acronym is SSHRC. So that's the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. So that's NSERC, Natural Sciences and Engineering's partner organization. I won SSHRC doctoral fellowships and a postdoctoral scholarship. And my mother used to spell SSHRC SHIRK. Instead of the way that we say. So, you know, what we sound and what people hear is very, very different. But acronyms will lose your audience right off the bat. So if you can pull all the acronyms out, I recommend it. Academic language, really academic, like hypothesis, literature, methodology, rationale, discourse, those really kind of theoretical words, if you can pull them out, especially in your 3-minute part, do so. If someone digs in a little bit deeper and they want to know more, then you can drill down and get a bit more technical. But generally, in your 3 minutes, you want to remove as much of that academic language as you can. Short sentences, short words, short paragraphs, and active voice. Like I said, I did this rather than this was done by Merle. One of the reasons for that is because when you're doing an in-person poster session or even an online poster session where maybe people are going to be able to ask you questions, what you're trying to set up is a conversation. You're trying to set up that back and forth. And there's a few technical ways that if you've finished your 3-minute pitch and they're still standing there, or even as part of your 3-minute pitch, I've seen this done really, really well. You're going through and you say, you know, if you're doing beekeeping and all of a sudden they swarm, what should you do? And people are, I don't know anything about bees. Okay, well, you tell them what to do. Or you can insert it as part of your 3-minute pitch. We tried doing this because we wanted to test this. But what do you think happened at this point? And you can craft it as a conversation if you feel confident in doing so. Another example is, we thought we set up this research and we thought that this was going to happen, but that's not what happened. Why do you think we were wrong? If you're confident enough to set up a conversation, you can certainly do that. There are risks to doing this, however. They could hijack you and send you off in a completely new direction. But what you can do is, after you're finished your 3-minute pitch, if they're still standing there, these are some devices that you can potentially use to draw in them and bring out some more questions. So I'm sorry that the quality isn't very good on this one, but it comes from Calvin and Hobbes. And Calvin says, I like to verb words. What? I take nouns and adjectives and use them as verbs. Remember when access was a thing? Now it's something you do. We access our email, for example. It got verbed. And he says, verbing weirds language. And Hobbes says, maybe we can eventually make language a complete impediment to misunderstanding. Basically, what I'm trying to do here is to remind you that this is about having that conversation, and try to leave the academic language in anything that maybe you're going to put into a journal article. So instead of saying implement, you say do. Price, never say the word utilize. I hate it. Say the word use. We constructed this, you made it. So yeah, or turning nouns into verbs. Impacted, yeah, that one grates my teeth. Interface, that's another one. But if your supervisor has particular needs around these words, or if they're some highly technical words that must be used, some exceptions can be made. But if you can, in your conversational style, try and make sure that you're actually using conversational words. So then we come to why. This picture actually is a stone that was found in Western Canada. It tells the story of a year in the life of a particular band. But when you tell people your why you did this research, why it matters, showing your enthusiasm is a huge part of it. Why does your work matter? That's what they're really interested in. And where can you see it making an impact? So maybe you're just working on zebrafish, or we're working on fruit flies. But if you can solve and unlock a particular problem, tell us about, maybe this is going to have an impact on how we study Parkinson's disease, or maybe this is going to make an impact on beehives and their longevity. So you can kind of make that connection between the small part of research that you're working on and that really larger goal. It can be lofty, and I'm not saying that you need to actually make that connection, but just say, this is where it could make an impact in the future. Your audience will appreciate it. So we get a lot of questions, at least you hope to. Ideally, if you've done your job well enough, you're enthusiastic, you told them a story that they can understand, you've brought them in with your analogy or your metaphor or your story, and they've listened to your 2 to 3 minute pitch. What if they ask questions? What do you do now? Some really good things to talk about is that you can tell them, what if you could do it again, what would you do differently? That's always a good thing. It's like, maybe at this point we could have gone in this direction instead and see what happens. Or you say, well, we've brought the research to this point. I can see us doing work in this area to take the research further. And this is also a good point to say what's needed to get the work to the next level. Maybe we need to take our work to the synchrotron and do some really in-depth investigation using the light source. Maybe we need to go out into the field and actually test it in real life conditions and see what happens. What skills did you learn from this work, and where are those skills taking you? That's something that your audience will be really, really interested in, because sometimes we get so bogged down in the details of the research, the content of the research, that we forget to talk about the skills that we've developed to become researchers, to become scholars, to become artists. And we can talk about the skills that we've learned over the course of our summer or over the course of our project. And what are those skills that we're going to be taking with us? I really learned this stuff that got me really interested in environmental management. And so I've got a whole new direction for my life. Or I really got interested. I got hooked by the research bug. I'm going to go into graduate school, but I'm really interested in this. I'm going to shift my area and go over here. And so these sorts of things, or, let's say that you learn technical skills, like I've already landed a job with a particular company because they're interested in some of the research skills that I gained doing this project. This is also when, depending on your audience, if you happen to have a technical person who's completely enthralled with what you've done and they ask more technical questions and they request more technical details, excellent. Now's the time for you to dive in just that little bit more, and you can go, but don't go from like that top level down into the weeds. Try and figure out if there's ways that you can go down. Okay, well, this is the next level of technical detail, and if they ask more questions, okay, then you can go to the next level of technical detail and continue that conversation. Try not to make a big jump from, the high level stuff down to the weeds. Try and, build in some shorter steps as you go through. But you can get more technical, but try not to do that unless they ask for it. If they're looking for more technical details, that's the time to give it to them. The third aspect is practicing, and this is sort of that conversation. So this is a picture from the USSU symposium this spring. One of the presenters was an artist, and she had written an original song which she performed for us. And you can imagine that she didn't just make up that song on the fly and perform it right then. She had taken all the time to think through and build the song and go through all of that work. And then she had performed the song for herself, then she'd performed the song for friends and family, and then she performed the song for us. So by the time she got to us, of course, she had a lot of practice to get there. So recognizing that most of you are not going to be bringing an original song to the symposium, still that concept of practice that you really get from the arts is something that we all could learn a lot from. So plain language. So when you practice, so what I want you to do is actually sit down and write what you're going to write out, and I'll talk about that in a second. But as you're doing that, plain language is stronger, not weaker than academic language. And plain language always makes your academic writing better too. So that's the first thing. When you sit down to practice, even if you just what I often recommend people do is to read their introduction and conclusion, especially if you've done a poster, read that out loud. And it's like, okay, how can you make that simpler? How can you make that plainer? What can you take out even just from your introduction and your conclusion and make that as plain as possible? That's actually a really good way in to crafting your 3-minute overview. But I do want you to write and plan it out. So if you know your key points and you tell it like a story with that hook that we talked about, so that can be introduction. So sometimes I've heard people do it like a story. So your hook, your introduction, your rising action, that's what you did. Your climax is what you discovered, and your finale is why does it matter? So that's still that why, what, why. Why did you do it? What did you do? What did you discover? And why does it matter? So it still works just like a story. But I do want you to write it out. Usually 3 minutes is a couple of pages, about 2 pages roughly. And double spaced, by the way, not 2 pages single spaced. 2 pages double spaced at about 14 font gives you about 3 minutes. It's about 1 minute to 1.5 minutes per page, depending on how fast or how slow you talk. But it averages about that. Write it out, simply because then you can read it out loud and then you can edit it back and you can take out the extras. When you write it out and then you take that script and you kind of speak it out loud, I'm not asking you to memorize it and always say it exactly the same way, but if you have a script that you've practiced a few times, several times, is that it becomes, in case you get nervous, your body will just take over. You'll have muscle memory and it will just remember what you were going to say next and what your key points were that you want to make sure that you cover. So written and spoken are different, it's true, but if you write it out and then speak it to practice it, you can actually recraft your written stuff, and the two do work together quite well. So this is what I do. This is my practice. So I write something out and then I read it out loud and I time myself. I literally set up my timer on my phone or my watch. I try not to look at it. I just head down, read, see where I'm at for time. Okay, so I know I'm way over. I always am. So then I need to revise. I need to cut. I need to revise some more. I'll also stop as I'm reading it. If I've got a sentence that's too long, if I've got a sentence that I know I need to cut into 2 or maybe even 3, or if I'm tripping over the words that I'm using, then I know that I need to choose different words. So I read everything out loud a couple of times because it helps me in the revision and the cutting process. And then when you think you're getting a little bit closer, read it out loud again. Once you've got it to a shape that you think you're pretty much ready, then you practice with an audience. My daughter gets to hear a lot of my presentations, and I'll set up in the living room with my iPad, and I've got my things out there, and she'll hit the record button, or she'll hit the timer, and I'll practice with an audience. And then I incorporate her feedback. Did I lose you at any point? Did you get bored? What did you not understand? And ask for that feedback, because then you can incorporate that feedback and then you can add it back in and practice again. There's no such thing as a finished or perfectly polished presentation, so don't worry about that. There will always be things that you'll be like, oh, I forgot to mention this, or you'll say, gee, I thought I had it, pretty good, but my audience wasn't quite there. There's always things that you can do to work on it and practice. And you can even shift it. You can have one. I know some people who have a poster, and then they'll develop a really general talk that they would give to someone who has absolutely no background, like me, a historian, and you're a scientist of any kind. It's like, okay, this is my talk for Merle to tell her what I did. It's like, okay, this is my talk for a super smart postdoc who's in the lab next door, who I know is going to be asking the more technical stuff. Some people might have sort of 2 variations on theirs. I recommend starting with the one and then using the more in-depth stuff in that back and forth conversation. That's what I would recommend for an in-person symposium. You are going to be on the stage, so do think of yourself as being on the stage. So again, that practicing your voice, shoulders back, breathing well, being clear, being precise, trying to slow yourself down if you're like me and talk quite fast. You are on the stage. So warming up before your presentation, I talked a bit about this, warm up your body. You can also warm up your voice. You can do some voice warm-ups. There's quite a few online, just find a couple. You can also do some tools and tricks. If you're fast, just means that you're really excited. And that's actually not always a bad thing, as long as your audience you're not so fast that they can't understand you. But it can show how excited you are about a particular aspect. You can even have different paces for different parts of your presentation. I got really excited about this because I was really into this particular programming, and there's a professor here at the university who does this, and I went to him and I got a job and we got to set up this project, and I'm so excited. And then you maybe go more slow and measured to tell us about what you did. You can do your pitch, of course, soft and loud, low, high. That makes a difference, and your tone does matter. If you do want to aim for that more friendly and connecting tone rather than a monotone like this, because your audience will fall asleep and walk away. Sorry, that was an overshoot. I know, but at the same time, we've all done it, including me. If I'm scared, I will go monotone. So I have to really work at it, make sure that I've done everything that I can do to build my voice and my confidence before I go in. Also, even if you are excited, try not to rush. Give your audience time to process. You can pause during your 3 minutes. You don't want to pause so long that they insert a question, unless you want them to, that's fine. Just kind of allow them to be put. You can even ask them, how you doing? Are you still with me? I'll keep going. You can stop and check in and definitely watch your audience and just see if they've got the glazed eye thing going on, you know that you might need to back up. But giving your audience time to process is an important part of a presentation. Body language. This is another one that does matter. So again, that walking in, you don't want to be in their face. You don't want to be right in front of them. You want to keep your own space, but you do want to stand tall and be powerful. I do a lot of hand movements. My brother-in-law tells me that if someone tied my hands behind my back, I wouldn't be able to talk anymore because I move my hands a lot. Some people do find it distracting, and I've been told that before. However, it's how I have learned to accept that criticism, but not necessarily to change because of that criticism. However, some people do find hand movements or other tics distracting habits. You might want to film yourself presenting this and see what happens, because you might be able to catch yourself with a few distracting sorts of things and maybe learn how to stop them. Dressing professionally, you'd think it would go without saying, but I know that coming out of COVID, excuse me, coming out of COVID, there are days when what you see on the bottom, maybe pajama pants and sweatpants, definitely in an in-person symposium, you do want to dress a bit more professionally than that, as clean as you can, obviously. And going back to the dressing professionally, make sure that if you've drank coffee that day, that you have a mint as well. Really important. Record yourself practicing, I mentioned that, and watch it for strengths and weaknesses. And don't be hard on yourself, because everyone has their own style and we're all learning and getting better. But recording yourself giving a presentation allows you to build on and notice any strengths and weaknesses for yourself, and then you can build on them. One thing that students will often forget to do is to introduce yourself. So try and remember to do that. Hi, my name is Merle. I'm a Saskatchewan historian. When I'm introducing myself in the context of SURE, I introduce myself as the coordinator of the Undergraduate Research Initiative at the University of Saskatchewan. And then at the end, thank them for stopping by to chat with you. Thanks very much for stopping. Do you have any further questions that I haven't answered? Or you can say, what questions might you have for me? I like framing it that way, because then that usually puts them on the spot to actually ask you a question. And then you've got a bit of a back and forth conversation. But with that, that's really it. I find that writing and presenting is a bit like baking. Yes, you follow a recipe, but there's a lot of room for experimentation. And the more you practice it, the better you'll become at it. So this is me when I'm on a big baking spree. I will do, donuts and pie and buns. And this is a pretty typical baking session in my house. But that's really all that I wanted to present today. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen. And if you have any questions for me of things that you'd like me to address, now is your chance.
Hi, Merle. Great presentation. Thank you for for doing that for us. I was just wondering if there would be a possibility to get the slideshow from you.
Absolutely.
They had a lot of great points. So
yeah, absolutely. Yes. No, I'm happy to share the slideshow, and don't forget, I am recording it as well. And so I will post it on our YouTube page, and I can give you guys a link to our YouTube page in case you've never been there before.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Sorry, I'm just looking around and finding, yes. So it's just Undergraduate Research Initiative at USask, but I will put the link in the chat for you as well. And by all means, find it and subscribe to the channel, then you won't miss anything. There's about 100 videos on all kinds of aspects of becoming a professional and an undergraduate researcher. There's a lot on communication and research skills and professional development in there. But I'll make a PDF of the presentation and send that around as well. You're welcome. I wanted to be respectful of all of your time and give a bit of a shorter presentation today. I see no more questions coming in on the chat. I'm going to stop the recording. And if there are more questions, then you can still, I'll stay for a few extra minutes. But thank you so much for joining us today.